I want to see a show of hands who knows Yiddish from home, whose parents spoke Yiddish, whose parents spoke Yiddish only when they didn't want them to understand. One over here, so not that many in this audience, one over there, one over there. Theo used to call the rest of us Yiddish impaired. And for those of us who were Yiddish impaired, he was also always happy to do some translation. Actually, all of the translations of the songs in this movie were his. I'd also like to just remark before I even begin that I told you before the movie started that this was a kind of a re-scripting of his one-man show. When Theo showed up at the studio to film this, most of the crew were young people. They didn't know who to expect. They'd never heard of Theodore Bikel. And when he walked in, he was 88 and a half years old. When they walked in, they said, "Oi, we're in for a long couple of days here." Every single scene in this movie was done in one take. There's not one example of two takes, except one song where one of the musicians forgot their part somehow in the middle. Everything else was done in one part. So that's what it means to be a professional, and that's what it means to have experience of age. And so I think that we all were able to see his craftsmanship that developed over time and got better and better until really his last day. Theo talked a lot about the importance of memory as a way of moving forward towards the world that we want to see. He wrote in a letter that I have to a principal of a Jewish school in 1969, he wrote, "How are we supposed to know where we're going if we don't know where we came from? I suggest that when you teach your children in the school, you teach them where we came from, but that you do it in the form of song and of stories, because the lessons that they'll learn in their history classes, they'll forget probably by the time they go home. But a song that they sing with the right words, and especially if together with a group of other kids, those songs they will never forget." So Theo himself started his life as a person, as a Jew, and of someone deeply involved in the quest for tikkun olam, for making the world a better place through music, through songs. As a young boy, his dear departed father, Joseph Bikel of blessed memory, would take him for walks in the Vienna woods. And while they were on these walks, they would sing out loud songs in Hebrew and in Yiddish and even in German, Jewish songs, folk songs, Zionist songs. And in between songs, his father would speak to him in Yiddish and in Hebrew and in German about the importance of loving your own people, about the importance of cherishing your own history, of the dignity of labor, of all working people. Joseph Bikel was a very proud socialist. The dignity of labor, and of the imperative as a Jewish boy and Jewish man to find the places where the world was broken and to get busy mending those places without a moment to spare, and to do that every day of your life. So for Theo, the essence of being Jewish was the art and the act of mending this world. I want to go back a minute and tell you a word about myself, especially because the theme of this specific gathering here today is Jewish women and storytelling. I had to think a lot about how to approach that subject in this specific talk, because as you saw, it was a movie about two Jewish men, hardly a woman to be seen in the movie except the beautiful Belle Kaufman, Shalom Aleichem's great-granddaughter, who passed away about 4.5 years ago. So I thought that I'd start by telling you in a few sentences that before I met my husband, I was a very successful senior journalist and foreign correspondent based in India, covering all of the news out of Asia for a few very large newspapers. A single mom, a very independent career woman, interested, I would say, often or especially in the stories of women empowerment, of girls in the continent, and certainly a feminist with all of my might. When my husband when I married my husband, he was already quite an older man, and I left my career in order to care for him. He was 88 at the time that I met him, and he needed my help, plain and simple. And I loved him, and it was no problem for me to leave what I was doing. When he passed away, I founded something called the Theodore Bikel Legacy Project, which is a nonprofit organization devoted to keeping his memory alive, especially in all that concerns the art of Tikkun Olam, the work of Tikkun Olam through music and storytelling. Some people started asking me if I don't mind putting so much of my own life, I don't want to do air quotes, so I'm going to hold my hands to make sure I don't do any air quotes, but if I didn't mind putting my own work or my own aspirations or my own talents aside to keep alive the memory of someone, of my husband, of a man. I definitely come from a generation of women who expected of ourselves to be self-fulfilled, to make something of ourselves in our own right. Our friends expect that of us every bit as much as we expect that of ourselves. And the implication was, when I got this question of don't I mind, the implication was that I should mind. And I thought about it a lot because, as I said, I do come from a cohort of women who would normally mind putting their own path aside to keep alive the memory of a man, of a husband, of a father for some people. So I want to tell you about my process that brought me to founding the Theodore Bikel Legacy Project and to where I am today, sitting here telling you about Theo 3.5 years after he passed away. When he passed away, it fell to me to gather up many dozens of file boxes with his papers that he had stored in different storehouses all across the country, depending on where he lived and where he moved. Theo kept everything, so there were a lot of file boxes with tens of thousands of papers. In the year after he died, I gathered up these filing cabinets and brought them back to Los Angeles. And for the course of a year, more than a year, I sat in our apartment, mostly in the dark after everyone went to sleep, with only one lamp lit, reading the papers that made up his life from when he was a very young man, still in Vienna, through his life as a pioneer on a kibbutz in pre-Israel Palestine, through his life as a beginning actor in Tel Aviv, to London, where he became a star on the West End and entertained the Queen and entertained princes and princesses, to his new life in New York as a Broadway star, to Captain Von Trapp. As we know, Theo originated the role of Captain Von Trapp, his letters back and forth with the creators and with Mary Martin, all the way through the civil rights movement, all the way through his Jewish activism. I sat for more than a year, night after night, reading these papers, fan letters, letters to lovers, letters from his father, letters back and forth with directors. And in all of these letters, there was one theme that came through in every single one, and that was Theo's continual questioning of how the world, why the world is unjust as it is, and how he could, and we all could, make this world better. In Theo's own specific style, there was something very special because Theo was never morose. Actually, he was unusually joyful. I've never met a person more joyful than Theo in my life, who liked to laugh and make others laugh. So this combination of this deep recognition that we live in a world that's broken, together with this innate joy that exploded out of him at all times, to me was very attractive and very fascinating. And it taught me things that I hadn't known before, that we can love the world in a joyful way while continuing to be devoted to changing it. I saw the hundreds of letters that he wrote his fans. He answered every single fan mail, and there was tens of thousands of fan mail. And I saw the letters that he wrote to children who wrote him. And as I read these letters, I became intimately acquainted with my husband, who I had only known for 3.5 years before he passed away. I became intimately acquainted with him as a 19-year-old, and as a 35-year-old, and as a 50-year-old, and as an 80-year-old. And as I came to know him ever more deeply and ever more intimately in the course of that year, I fell more in love with him than ever as time took us farther apart from each other. And by the time that year was over, I knew that there could be no greater honor for me in my life than to devote myself to telling the story of this great man or woman, me, man or woman, husband or not husband. The joy, the honor, and the privilege that I felt outweighed everything. And that's how I find myself sitting here before you today talking about this movie and about Theodore Bikel as, yes, a woman who's devoted herself to telling the story of this great man. What I came to be was another link in the great golden chain that Theo used to talk about. Theo loved talking about the two golden chains of Jewish life. This is how he described them. One chain was vertical. It started in the very beginning, in Adam and Eve, and went down through all of our ancestors, to our grandparents, to our parents, to us here in the center, to our children, our grandchildren, and all the generations that will come after us, all linked together in a golden chain. He spoke also about the horizontal chain that linked us to all of the other Jews in the world, Sephardi and Ashkenazi, communist, and what's the opposite of communist? Not communist, right? Secular and Orthodox, all of us together, one community, united by a golden chain. It pained Theo terribly much to see the divisiveness in the Jewish community that seemed to him to be growing over the years instead of lessening. Right after the Anschluss, when all of the Jews in Vienna were, as in his words, scurrying around like mice, trying to find visas to other countries so that they could leave and get out in time, visas which were not available. Many times we think, why didn't they get out? Many of them were trying to get out. Those visas were not available. People were going to consulates from morning till night, trying to get these exit visas, these visas into other countries. At that time, the British government decided to give the Jewish community in Vienna 10 entry permits into Palestine. They were in a generous mood. So they gave 10 entry visas to Palestine to the president of the kind of Jewish organization, a kind of a federation that was ruling in Vienna at the time. There was a meeting of the different Zionist groups, and it was decided, as matter of course and as matter of fact, to divide up the entry visas to Palestine among the different Zionist groups at the time. And so some of them went to the labor socialist Zionists, some of them went to the Orthodox Zionists, some of them went to the revisionists, to the Beitar group, and everyone took for granted that everyone should be treated equally in that way. As a matter of fact, it's because of those entrance permits that Theo and his parents were able to get out, because his father was the leader of the socialist Zionists in Vienna. So Theo saw with his own eyes a community that, when under the threat of extermination, which actually the community was annihilated, when under threat of annihilation, it became obvious that they were all brothers no matter what their opinions would be. And it pained him to the point of tears to see the faction, the division into factions in our own Jewish community. The bdika b'tzitziot, the checking by the tzitzit all the time. What's your opinion? Where do you stand on immigration? Where do you stand on the president? Where do you stand on kashrut? Where do you stand on BDS? Where do you stand on the issues of the day? And loving each other or hating each other according to our opinions on those issues. If there's a very strong message that I could bring today from Theo, from the grave, is that no good will come from this vitriol and this, I would say, loathing and hate that many communities within the Jewish world have been directing towards each other in the past years. Theo was afraid of anti-Semitism. Of course he was. He was a victim of the Nazis. But more than anti-Semitism, he was afraid of that hate. I also want to say that in his walks with his father, like I said, his father taught him about the importance of tikkun olam for all brothers and sisters in the world. It came from a connection to our own Judaism, but that did not mean it had to be directed only towards Jewish people. For Joseph Bikel, that was obvious, and therefore for Theo Bikel, that was obvious as well. He used to say that sometimes people would say to him, aren't there enough causes in the Jewish world that dafka, you have to go out and look for a cause, for civil rights in the South, for apartheid in South Africa? No, there's enough going on in the Jewish world. And Theo would say to them, don't you understand? For me, all oppressed people are Jews. All oppressed people are my brothers and my sisters. All oppressed people are my brothers and my sisters. And my duty is to work for all of them. It's not common, in fact, it's very rare for someone to be able to hold in their heart the absolute and complete devotion, adoration for their own people and for their own culture, while at the same time holding in their heart a complete and non-judgmental openness, curiosity, and I would even say love for the culture and for the religion of all our brothers and sisters around the world. And Theo did just that. And if I would say one of my absolute favorite parts of Theo's heritage was that lesson that he taught us, is that we can and maybe should or could love who we are, work on loving who we are, embracing who we are, but loving everyone else all of the same. I'm going to finish with one story that I've made a commitment to tell every time I go and speak about Theo. And it has to do with the 75-year anniversary of Kristallnacht in November of 2013. One of the greatest honors of my life was that I was able to accompany Theo on this trip to Vienna, where he was invited by the Austrian government to come to Parliament and give a concert in the Parliament room, not on some side library room, but in the actual Parliament meeting room. And he did. And in the room were all of the ministers of the Austrian government, the chancellor, the vice chancellor, the president of the assembly, the chief of staff of the army, many ambassadors, the chief rabbi of Austria, and the mayor of Vienna. All of the dignitaries that you could think of sat in government, and Theo got up before them, speaking to them in Yiddish, told them that Vienna was the city of his childhood, a city from which he got so much, his love for the arts, his love for music and for drama, a city he would love his whole life, but a city from which he had been exiled, and because of that had become a refugee in one way or another for the rest of his life. He told them a few things. He said for that reason, as a refugee, his concern for refugees and his desire to help the welfare of refugees would remain forever. Also, he told them, I thank you for this honor of coming and speaking in the name of my people and singing in the name of my people 75 years after the mass murderers would have come to destroy us. The great irony of history is that they are all gone and I'm still here singing the songs of my people, singing my songs of peace and freedom. He sang in French, he sang in Hebrew, he sang in German, and he sang in Yiddish. And at the very end, he told everyone to stand. He said, this is a song that is listened to standing and sung standing. And they all stood up in their Austrian military uniforms or, whatever other clothes they were wearing. And he sang the survivor song in Yiddish and the song that the partisans, the Jewish partisans sang in the forest. And there was not a dry eye in the house, and the shivers up and down everybody's spine. That's 75 years after Kristallnacht. The reality is that they are gone. And who was there in the Austrian parliament was Theo singing the survivor song in Yiddish with the tallis around his shoulder. And just to make things better, when he was all done as a Kohen, he gave them all the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, the entire Austrian government, as a special thank you for honoring our people in that way. I'm going to finish by saying, how could I not feel an immense, humbling honor and privilege to have become another golden link in the chain, and to be able to go around the country, to go around the world, telling the story of the great and one and only and beautiful and amazing and magnificent Theodore Bikel. So that's it. Thank you for hearing me.
So Flea can join us up here really quick.
Now we have a panel.
Just to kind of tie everything together for the end of our mini film festival.
I love your series. I binge watched your series, and like one after I heard about it, I got on. I binge watched the whole thing. I couldn't stop.
Yeah, I'll sit here. And
You want us on two sides of you? Or?
then, maybe there like that. I don't know how the microphone works best for you guys.
And after our panel, we're both very happy for questions and answers. And I have fabulous Theo DVDs, CDs, some CDs that they're the last remaining copy and things like that. So we'll talk about that after.
So first, thank you guys so much for coming. I know the emails back and forth and all the crazy planning, but I'm so happy you guys were able to both make it. Thank you all for coming.
It always takes planning, and thank you so much for having us. Thank you so much.
This is really exciting for Kesher. We're going to start trying to do a lot more women programming in particular, so I thought no better way than to bring women creators here with us. So I was just like, you guys kind of touched on this already, but were there any specific motivations into diving into film and storytelling beyond what you said, or anything else you guys like to add from your talkbacks?
You first, as our bona fide young storyteller.
I talked a lot about how it really came from a place of wanting to act, but also I think just in terms of representation, I think we tell our own stories the best, and no one's going to tell them for us. And I felt like there was a lot of voices missing in mainstream TV and film, and there were a lot of voices that I felt were really important to be represented. And I felt like, my story wasn't told, and there was a lot of interesting stories around me that weren't told, and I thought that was really valuable to add different kinds of stories from an authentic place, and also giving voice to other kinds of people. And I think that's one of my main goals as a filmmaker, to really just lift people up by centering their voices.
That's beautiful.
Anything you'd like to add?
Well, we live in I'm going to say a kind of a cliche, we live in the world of the 24-hour news cycle. It's a closed loop. We have we all watch what we have chosen to watch, or we read what we've chosen to read, and it's the same information going around and around, and it seldom takes us out into the world of beauty and of music and of our own story, like you said, of our own story and how we want to use our story to move forward. So I also very much believe in the power of story more than the power of the everyday news cycle as an agent for changing the world in the direction that we want to see it changed.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the medium of film especially is such a powerful tool for that, because it reaches so many people in such a powerful way, and it has the ability to kind of show you what somebody else's experience is like, and that's a really powerful thing that nothing else really does. So I think it's important that we utilize that in positive ways.
Yeah, and so if this is some great medium, how did you actually realize that this would resonate with audiences? What made you when did that light bulb go off that this was either way before you started the filming process, while you were filming, when did the light bulb go off? And you kind of both talked about this a little bit before, but if you want to add in anything else.
Well, I mean, I'm just representing Theodore Bikel. So, right, when the first time the movie filmed, there was 700 or 600 people in the movie theater, and they all clapped after every song, and there was no doubt that it was a hit. The movie has screened across the country, but we're crisscrossing it again because I feel like I would like more people to see it. But people have always loved him and have always loved to see everything about him. So in that case, it's a little bit of an easier question. But since he's been gone, there was a lull for a while, and lately there seems to be an interest again. And I'll just put in parentheses, part of it maybe has to do with the fabulous Yiddish revival that we're seeing, which I feel so excited about. Has anyone been to see Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish yet? Go to, get on a bus, go to New York, see Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish. It is tremendous. When you see it, you will realize that the Fiddler on the Roof that you know was only a dress rehearsal. You will put it away and you will never watch it again, because Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish, actually you realize this is how the play should look. And there is a Yiddish revival going on, and maybe that has something to do with the new interest as of late.
I have to see it. I haven't seen it yet.
See it.
Yeah, I think I spoke about this a little bit before, but like the first moment when I watched the film on a big screen with an audience and they actually reacted to it was when I knew I had something. And then every time we release an episode, it's still a little bit of that fear, like, will people still like this one? But then like the messages and the comments that come in from people who say, this is exactly my experience, or like, it's not my experience, but now I understand it better. That's been really powerful and makes me realize that it's still really relevant and kind of encourages me to keep going.
So that kind of ties into another question that's been on my mind for a while about creating in the Jewish film world. So when you get the reactions from the audience that this is working, what obstacles might you face though in putting out certain content, and how have moving pieces from the secular world kind of help you maybe combat some of the obstacles you might face from reaching within the Jewish world to make that film?
You mean like about specific kinds of content?
Yeah, either specific types of content or just creating a product in general. I don't know what type of funding.
I would say that very interestingly, it's been interesting for me to see how, even though certainly in Hollywood where I do live, the industry is very unproportionately filled with Jewish people. I mean, really, that's not just a myth. It's insane.
Yeah.
But the minute the content becomes specifically Jewish, there's this kind of a pulling away. And it's the true of Jewish magazines as well, and Jewish press as well. Anything where the content is specifically Jewish, people are like, I'm not really sure I want to be part of that. Funding is slim for Jewish film projects. Now we have the Jewish film festivals everywhere, so at least there's a place to show them. But very specific Jewish content, except lately there's that Haredi from Israel kind of fascination. So there's some films that have done well, and now with Shtisel, let's see, it'll probably grow even more. But I would say that things with specific Jewish content have a hard time being funded, and they have a hard time getting their office time in the meetings of the big in the offices of the big executives in the television world and in the film world. I know of at least 6 fabulous projects right now, written series that have been written, pilots that have been written, movies that have been written, that are so obvious that they haven't been done yet, about synagogues or about the Jewish world, and they have a hard time getting going. And I think they should all learn from you and just go ahead and put their thing up on the internet and get out of their stuck mind that it has to be a studio or some big whatever, because you went and did it. Yeah. And now you beat them all to the finish line. I think it's fantastic what you've done. People sit for 10 years trying to get that project off the ground, that Jewish project, and you just did it.
Yeah.
You're a pioneer.
Wow, thank you.
No, you are. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that's what's so amazing about living now. It's like, in the past, you really had no other way to get your content in front of an audience. You had to go the network or studio route. And now, with YouTube and all these other platforms, you can literally just put your content out there and get an audience. And it's really empowering. With that being said, one of my goals with the show is actually we have written a pilot and to pitch it and get it on a larger network or platform. And I think I agree that there's a lot of resistance to exclusively Jewish content. I see that like changing a little bit now, especially with the success of like the Israeli TV shows like Shtisel or the films and things like that, and people are seeing that there is this fascination with this culture. So I think that's changing slowly, and now specifically is a really good time for a pitch about a Jewish, for a Jewish show, I think, more than ever. But at the same time, it's more of a challenge than I think other pilots would have. And then in general with my show, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is certainly with the funding. The way that we fund the show now is through product placements and sponsorships, which you may or may not have noticed in the episode. But what we've been able to do is really partner with organizations that have important messages and, social justice kind of organizations. So like with episode 5, we partnered with the Organization for the Resolution of Agunot, and that was a really important cause that we wanted to bring awareness to. And we wrote them into... Can you explain
Agunot?
Yeah, sure. So there's this kind of crazy phenomenon where women will have trouble getting their Jewish divorce from husbands who use it to kind of blackmail them or things like that. And so this organization, Aura, came up with a halachic prenup, which basically eradicates the aguna crisis. And it is a contract, it's just a legal agreement where a husband or a wife who refuses to give or accept the Jewish divorce has to pay a fee for every day. And it's been effective in like 100% of their cases. And so we partnered with them, and they sponsored part of the show, and we wrote their halachic prenup into the episode, and we created a character that was an aguna, and we really formed the episode around this issue. And we're a comedy, so it was a challenge to do that and still be funny. But I think we're able to do that.
As donating organs.
Exactly. Oh my
That was the first time I saw that turn into a comedy.
Yeah, exactly. That took quite a while to figure out how to do that. But it's just become like our biggest challenge, which is the funding, has also become a really incredible source of like doing good work and being able to bring these really important issues to the forefront of our audience. So that's something we really want to do more of with larger partners.
And on that note of social activism, Theodore is also a huge social activist, and you touched upon this a little bit earlier, but is there anything specific that we can learn from what he did with activism to maybe drive our own activism? DC is a really politically motivated place. A lot of us are all on the scene all the time with these issues, so is there any advice from Theodore's life that you saw or from your own personal experiences that you can share?
Well, thank you for that question. I think one important point always to remember is that you can just start where you are, that the street is, there's what to sweep up around us all over, and not to get too bogged down is this issue, the most important one, or is this issue the one that fits me the most, or will it get me the most attention? You just start. You see something that you'd like to change, something that needs to get changed, you start and you do it. Theo had his hands in dozens of causes at all times, and some of them were famous, some of them were not famous at all, but if something came to his attention, he just stopped for a minute and he said, what can I do about this? And I found that very inspiring. As far as the specific of issues, because I'm very aware that I'm in the presence of a congregation which has one way of believing, and then I recognize some of the guests and they have other ways of believing, so I don't want to talk at this time about specific issues, but I do want to say that I do believe that work of mending a torn world is, people always say more important than ever. Maybe 500 years from now we'll still be saying more important than ever, but it is more important than ever, and there's a lot everywhere. You just have to turn on your computer and you see causes that need your attention. So just do it. Like, don't overthink it is what I'm trying to say. Don't overthink it. Do it. Volunteer, do it. Yeah.
And before we open up to Q&A from the audience, is something that kind of in this theme of Jewish womanhood, is there one wish you guys have for the future of Jewish womanhood that you would like to share with the group, or any trend you hope comes to fruition in the next, say, few decades?
I would love to see more Jewish women filmmakers. and I would love to see them being encouraged from a really young age. I think there are a lot, but they've been stifled, and I think I'd love to see us as a community and in our schools encourage them to tell their stories and embrace that passion that they have, because I think it's really important to give those stories a voice. So that is one of my hopes.
And Amy, anything from you?
Well, of course, I second everything you said. In a very Jewish way, specifically, I would love to see more women leaders in the Jewish world. I think that women bring a perspective. I think we all think this. Women bring a perspective which is invaluable, and I'm so happy about all the Jewish rabbis that we see now, and in all of the different denominations we now have Jewish women leaders. And hopefully that will also start a process of reimagining our women heroes from our ancient texts, that our mothers, that our foremothers, that the prophetesses that went before us will get their place of honor, that we'll learn to be encouraged and inspired by them as well. And that fear that women have for some reason from childhood, that so many women have, that to be seen and to speak their truth is something that is innately dangerous, that fear will be gone from this earth. And not only for women, it's hard for me to say only Jewish women. Of course, that's the hope that I have for all human beings. And while I'm a Jewish woman, I have that hope equally for every human being, that fear that to be myself and to take my place in the world will be dangerous for me, that fear will be gone, and a true world of peace and justice will dawn for us. That, of course, is our hope.
Yeah, wow, that's...
I mean, how can we finish with any less than that?
Right. So I don't know if anyone from the audience has any questions, but yeah, Keith.
Yeah, thank you both so much for being here. This was a very enjoyable afternoon.
Thank
I had
you.
a question for you, Leah. I was curious, in your decision to make Sumayu a comedy, and especially in the legacy, I think, of Jewish narrative storytelling, as we saw with Theodore Bikel's film, that comedy is a very Jewish, I think, character trait. And I was interested just how you came to that decision,
Sure.
how you write those episodes, and why that versus a drama or something else.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, like I said before, the series was very much inspired by this Israeli TV show, Srugim, which is very much a drama and is very heavy in a lot of ways. And I wanted to not be that at all, because I think there's enough heaviness, especially in like the pressure of dating that so many young Orthodox Jews or Jews feel. And I wanted to lift that pressure and lift that heaviness and let us like laugh at it a little bit, and not take ourselves so seriously. So that was like very much the intention from the beginning. And I think the response has been positive in that way. Like, people say that they can watch the show and like just relax and chill a little bit and not feel the pressure so intensely. So that was certainly the goal. And sometimes it's a little bit challenging to incorporate like more serious issues like organ donation or things like that. But we try to do everything within the lens of a comedy. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Amy, where's Theodore buried, and what's the story of Alan Alda's participation?
Alan always admired Theo's work. Their paths crossed professionally now and again, although not in any prominent work of any sort. They did a couple of summer shows together. Alan admired Theo's social justice work a lot. And Theo was the president of Actors Equity for about 30 years. Well, between being the president of Actors Equity and then the leader of an umbrella organization of all the performers in America. And so the actors used to call him our president because he was their president. And as the president of Actors Equity, he did some very radical things. Like, for example, he disallowed any union performances to take place in segregated theaters, because there were still segregated theaters, not only in the South, but even along this coast. And so he disallowed that, and that brought to the quick segregation of all of the rest of the segregated, it brought to the quick desegregation of all of the segregated theaters that still remained. He did a lot of very heavy-duty things as a union leader, and so a lot of the celebrity actors, they have that in their heart for him. He's buried, is that where you asked? He's buried in Hillside Memorial Park in Los Angeles. It's very close to the airport, so we thought that'd be a good place for him, for the quick entrance and exit from the city. And also it's nice for people that come and go that he's right there. It's where Al Jolson is buried. There's like this big, like a big water fountain in this cemetery that's the memorial of Al Jolson. And there's quite a few celebrities there. Leonard Nimoy is right next door. And as they're both Kohanim, it's kind of nice to have this little Kohanim plot. And Leonard Nimoy is actually not buried there because he was cremated, so oy vavoy, but he was. But he has a little like plaque in a place where, like a little memorial place next to the little stream, because they're buried in this place where there's a beautiful little stream and waterfall. And so the fans bring, all these little stones and signs and all kinds of things that always have the fingers on them. And it's so nice because I don't imagine the fans know that that's they're bringing it because live long and prosper. But the Jewish people know that that's the sign of our priests, of the Kohanim. So Theo and Leonard's area is just littered with little. So it's very nice. So I used to visit there a lot, probably way more than one would consider a healthy thing to do. But I love it there. It's beautiful. Now I go on the prescribed holidays and Yurtzites and things like that. That's where he's buried. It's a beautiful place. If anyone ever wants to visit him, I'm sure he'd like the visitors. No one ever asked me that before.
I think we have time for 2 more questions, if anyone.
So I grew up in a house where we had many Theodore Bikel records. My father was a big fan of Theodore Bikel. And I remember as a little kid going to a concert of his, which I think was at Carnegie Hall. And he said something which I quoted many times. It was sort of metaphorical statement, but I think it captured a lot of sort of his just down-to-earth realness. He was tuning the guitar, and after about 15, 20 seconds, he said, "Well, that's close enough for folk music." Do you know that?
But that sounds like
I've
him.
used it many times to many other things, but it's just a brilliant way of communicating.
In contrast to our dear friend Peter Yarrow, who would never say that's good enough about the tuning of a guitar, right?
And yet they're so similar.
So similar.
Always totally for social justice and just their personality and their energy and absolutely nonstop, bigger than life. It just so reminded me of Peter as I was watching that film. It was amazing.
We're talking about Peter Yarrow from Peter, Paul, and Mary, who's a close friend of some of the people here. And I don't know if you know that, but the first time that Theo and Peter met, they became lifelong friends. But the first time they met is when Peter was the president of the folk club at Cornell University. He was a sophomore, and he founded a folk music society. And Theo agreed to come and sing, because Theo, like Peter, agreed to everybody to do everything. So Peter came and picked him up from the airport in some old jalopy, and drove with Theo around the university with the megaphone saying, "Cornell for Bikel, Bikel for Cornell." And that's when they first met. And then way before Peter knew, Noel or Mary or anything years before. So.
That's amazing.
I wanted to say to you that inevitably everywhere I go in this country, people have their Theo Bikel story, and it really warms my heart. Either people that grew up on his records, they started playing guitar because of him, their parents taught them Yiddish through the records, or people that actually met him, took him to the airport, brought him from the train station, hosted him for a Shabbat meal, spoke to him by the water cooler. But it just feels like so many people knew who he was and were inspired by him, and that's really very heartwarming.
So one last question, if anyone wants to ask? Or...
Just take a sec. I'm Shaf from the Rabbi, Kesher Israel, and I just want to join Lauren in thanking our visiting artists. And to say a big thank you to Lauren, who, as part of our board, has really brought her.
I cannot deserve it. Thank you.
And brought her passion and vision to programming in the synagogue community and in the wider downtown community here.
Thank you, Rabbi, for coming and joining us. Thank you guys so much.
course.
I cannot, Rabbi and I have even started talking about what we can do next year to make this bigger and better, and
Wonderful.
hopefully
Love it.
maybe
Have
show once
ideas
again.
for you.
Yeah,
A new program.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you.
If anyone would
Please
like
come and
to,
browse Theo's
browse and talk
products
and
for sale.
We have this room for probably another 10-ish minutes. So